KCGM-TV presents, in association with the Nightscout Foundation, Are We There Yet? In T1 Tech. Tonight's guest is John Costik. As most of you know, John is the co-creator of Nightscout and the reason Nightscout made it to the cloud for remote monitoring. Tonight we will hit the ground running by asking John about his new project, xDrip G5 for Android. John will begin this evening's broadcast by giving us a little background on the project.
Beta testing is about to get started. So I do have a beta version of the xDrip app with G5 support. So obviously the xDrip app is something that sort of came out of the community. Stephen Black really pulled that all together to make the xDrip hardware, which is the mating of a Wixel and a BLE chip, a very viable option for folks, and has worked really well. And then now that we have this G5 that basically puts the BLE chip in the transmitter, we wanted to do something similar. So the first step was done by Nate, and I'll butcher his last name, Rakelif. I apologize for screwing that up. And so he had iOS code that got us authenticated. And Joe Ginley, another great software engineer, was able to help us out and get that portion really up and running in Java for Android. And we sort of took it from there. And I found a specific command to get what people call raw sensor data, but it's really just the current values from the sensor. There's no true raw data. There's always some filtering going on. But we can get that from the G5 transmitter and then apply Stephen Black's xDrip calibration routines and treat it pretty much like we treat a Wixel now in code in the xDrip app. So the real trick is just getting the G5 to authenticate and then get the commands running properly to get that sensor data out. So we're there pretty much. We need a wider test group, which is why we called out for a beta group. So we need to test across devices, and that's always the challenge with Android. People have many different devices running many different versions of the operating system. Manufacturers are free to fork and, I won't use the other F word, and screw around with, Android OS to their heart's content, and that can be very tricky to find, a stable spot for every device that people are going to be using. We may not get there. We may have to at some point say, look, this handful of devices is your best bet, and go with that. And I think that's pretty much been true since the beginning with, the basic Nightscout uploader, and it's also probably the reason
Medtronic
that Dexcom doesn't start with an Android uploader. It's just a significant challenge. So I'm very appreciative to the alpha group that really got us most of the way. This beta group will help get us hopefully across the finish line and get up and running for as many folks that want to use it.
Now, I know some people in the Medtronic group were complaining that Medtronic had put off their uploader, but based on what you said, have you seen a rhyme or a reason across? Is it like Samsung putting on TouchWiz that's messing things up? Is it plain vanilla that's working?
Well, so the biggest challenge I've had was with a plain vanilla device. Let me grab it here. So this Pixel C device, which is a Google device, was actually the hardest one I had. The hardest time I had getting one up and running, and I can only sort of guess, but it's just conjecture that their Bluetooth stack, so their set of code that drives the Bluetooth operating system level, is less stable than we need it to be, and you see variations on between OS revisions. And I've actually had an easier time on older versions, Lollipop specifically, than I have on Marshmallow and even on N. So,
yeah, somebody upgraded to N and said it was a brick wall for them. So Marshmallow, so if you're running Lollipop, you're going to have a better chance of this working. And then you were saying your Moto E, $50 Moto E was the most stable one that you worked with?
Yeah, so this is a Lollipop device, and it's working pretty well. And really doesn't miss a read if I have it within 15, 20 feet. Yeah, and part of the reason it may be stable is because that's the device I started with, so I was honing it for that from the beginning. And working with the Pixel C on Marshmallow and N, now that I have that working, I have some of the alpha folks have moved on to the early beta, and folks that have Marshmallow and were never able to get it working are now able to get it working with the beta. So I'm hopeful.
Oh, really?
That this initial beta release will be much more usable in Marshmallow Land.
How big is the user group for the beta test?
That'll add about 24 people to a group of, I think, maybe 18 to 20, of which there may be 10 to 12 like truly active users. I think there are some folks that got in there and it worked for them, and they just ran with it, and that feedback was good too. And sort of the setup process and getting started process is really what we need to key in on, and then sort of chase down the little bugs that may still be lying around. And there are a couple of features we'd like to get in there, namely, for folks to get their data into Clarity if they wanted to, because as it is now, it doesn't relay over the same way that the Dexcom G5 app does.
Were you looking for anything specific when you were picking beta testers? Certain hardware or experience level?
So it was a spread of hardware is what I wanted, a spread of versions of the operating system. And, one of the questions in there was like, why do you want to test? So if someone had slightly more compelling reason than another, when I got to that 24 threshold, but it was really just, at some point, it just became a random selection once the pool was big enough. Because there were, I want to say total, I probably had about 80 submissions. So.
Oh, wow. Now they're...
Getting much bigger than 24 would be unmanageable, I think.
When this is completed, the beta's completed, will this work with the G4?
Yeah, so at its core, it's the basic xDrip app, which supports the xDrip hardware, so the Wixel and Bluetooth, and there's several Wixel configurations on that.
Will there ever be an OTG version?
We could add that in.
Too much time for...
I think probably my first step, it's not too much time because the code already exists, right? So the OTG Nightscout uploader is a thing, and how difficult would it be to add that hardware functionality? Probably not horrifically difficult. It's just, it would be a similar process to this. Just get a group of testers and work with it. I think my first question would be, I'd probably poll the group, see what the interest level is, how many folks are still using. Excuse me 1 second.
Well, I know that outside of, like Poor Canada, sorry, but Poor Canada, they're still working with the 2014 solution, except for the xDrip Wixel.
Yeah, that's really probably the best route to go, but we can certainly attempt to tackle OTG and xDrip, because I know, the
Uh-oh. I think we lost John in Livonia. If you've ever been to upstate Northeast New York, the little village of Livonia is kind of like Lake Wobegon. It's right near a giant lake. It's got the main street. It's I'm guessing there's about 20,000 people there. And their little school was the first school to ever have somebody on a rig, which was a little oven. But John's going to dial back in. One of the things that he told me yesterday was that the range is limited based on how much they're trying to save the battery. So the range will be the same as it is on iOS. One of the... Andrew, John was frozen like Han Solo. Okay, here comes...
What was the last thing people heard?
The last thing they heard was Andrew saying John was frozen like Han Solo.
Han Solo.
So anyways, I was just talking about Livonia. How many people are there? 20,000?
In Livonia?
Yeah.
7,000.
7,000?
In the entire town?
How do you get such a massive Broadway presence there and gourmet restaurants for 7,000 people?
Probably because there's nothing better to do than sing and eat. we could go to get all of it. We could at both things pretty quickly.
Okay, so we were talking about, when you were gone, we were talking about the battery. The battery is, the distance has not changed because they're trying to conserve the battery, but yet they're bricking it if the battery does last.
Right, so the end of life at around 100 days, right, based on some formula, some counter in the chip. So that gets triggered by the session logic that kicks up when you start a session through either the receiver or the iOS app at this point. So that starts, a G5 transmitter's death march. So using xDrip G5 circumvents that. Doesn't mean it'll necessarily last much longer than that, but Wes, you sent me one
right
a while ago, and the app and the receiver weren't letting you start a new session, but I wore that one successfully for probably another 2 or 3 weeks.
What?
Before it stopped working, and actually the one I have on right now is from a colleague, his wife. It wouldn't let her start another session, so she gave it to me to try, and that was a little over a week ago. I think the longest I've had on one that was no longer starting up in
iOS
or on the receiver was 3 weeks.
Well, that's significant. When you're talking
so
about...
the question is, if you never use the iOS app or the receiver, if you start a transmitter fresh and only ever use xDrip, does it last longer? Because we're not using any of the calibration logic.
Oh.
It's a very basic, every 5 minutes, give me the sensor data. That's it. That's all it's doing.
So there still is hope that sensor that transmitter could last much longer. Well, it already is. 21 days? That's significant around the world, especially if you're self-funding at double the cost of the G4 outside the U.S.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of questions that it raises. So if you only use the G5 with an xDrip and it never starts that counter,
right?
Can we then start with battery replacements, that sort of thing, right? So as it is now, if it programmatically kills itself, you can change the batteries all you want. If that counter's tripped, it's tripped, right? New batteries aren't gonna resurrect anything.
Because Milos is just having great success with the Slim G4. Clean cuts. Have you seen pictures of that?
Yeah, those are nice.
Those are sweet. So you're saying that even if you change the batteries in the G5, the counter would be tripped.
Right. Yeah. If you've used the iOS or the receiver, so it remains to be seen whether or not we can do that with a G5 that's only ever been used to grab sensor data. So it's possible in their firmware that as soon as you start talking to it, they start a timer of some sort. Right. It may not necessarily depend on being connected to a receiver.
Our third musketeer, Adrian DeCroix, is asking, do we know what chip it uses? If it can't write to non-volatile storage, it can't remember it's dead.
Right. No, I don't know. Does he want a transmitter?
Do you want a transmitter, Adrian? There's plenty of disillusioned.
Yeah, I have 2 or 3. He can swap.
Lori Lynn is saying NRF51 chip depends on if debugged is enabled. I'm just gonna make like that makes sense to me.
What's that?
I'm just gonna pretend that made sense to me. Oh, the NRF51. Oh yeah, okay. Oh, okay. But you know, Dexcom, initially the receivers did not have to be sold outside of the US. The FDA requires it. Like in the UK, they doubled the price because they made their money on the receiver, according to Dexcom VP at D-Data Exchange told me that. So if they're making everyone buy a receiver, is that so that counter starts?
No, the iOS app would do the same thing, would trigger the same logic.
True. Now, at what point are you going to announce xDrip for iOS?
I mean, I can announce that it's been in progress for ages, much to some of my friends in Canada's dismay. So it works fine. I got to finish up the calibration stuff and basically run through the same sort of process that we're doing now with, like a small alpha and then beta group. But I can put the code up sooner. That's basically it right there.
So that's xDrip for iOS?
The interface isn't anything refined, but...
Refined?
Yeah,
we're dealing with T1 diabetes. Nothing is refined.
So the app itself can talk to an xDrip, a G4 share, or a G5.
So you can do xDrip, Wixel, G4, and G5 on that iOS app.
Yeah, any Bluetooth enabled, receiver or transmitter or Wixel combo, right? So,
man, I want that.
Testing, I may split it out and say, okay, here's the G4 share version, and maybe even ultimately they end up being 3 different apps in the store if we can get them through the store.
Does that help?
Right?
Does that help in the stability of the product if I'm sure it's reducing code?
I don't know. I mean, it's arguable whether or not it makes code management a little bit more challenging because then any UI changes have to be spread across. But if you break them down into libraries that are shared across
right.
Targets, applications, it's not too big a deal. You just basically end up with 3 applications that instead of having a configurable option,
right,
are baselined to a device. So,
that would actually be helpful for a lot of the sleep-deprived masses that I belong to. Because we'll find in support that someone is using the receiver, but they got the Wixel checked. So if it was just, here's your app, load it, like Dexcom does. The G4 and the G5, those are separate animals.
Right. We could do that, but that once I get this G5, Android xDrip set, I think that's where I'll move on to is getting those iOS apps out there. I know Ken's been bugging me for Mr. Stack's been bugging me for the G4 share one for a while, and that one works really well. They all 3 work.
Before you give that to him, I need to get a watch face from him. But he showed me in Michigan. It's like, I want that.
For the Apple Watch?
Yes, sir. Okay, so we've got some really great stuff coming down the pike. Now, Ben West tells me never ask when something's going to be released.
Yeah.
Because in the industry, they just put out a press release and miss it. Have you ever heard of that? Have you ever heard something like that? Wait a minute. What's this? Oh, it's my paperweight.
Yeah. I'm the king of saying, I want to get that out next week, and then 8 months later, going, oh shit, I excuse my language.
Oh man, I could have put us on a 7-second delay, but I was like, John's not going to swear in front of the children. Do we have any children out there? Ben says, G5, any notes on that for other implementations looking to do open APS version?
What's that?
Ben West says, yay G5. Any notes on that for other implementers looking to do open APS version?
Any notes?
Yeah.
Like just details on chatting with it?
What are you specifically asking, Ben?
Sorry. Sure, I understand.
I don't know if Ben's still there. When he pops back up,
Yeah,
I'll let you know.
If you look at Nate's iOS code and the xDrip G5
Now,
branch,
his getter name, is it Angry Nate or Mad Nate?
I think the Angry Nate.
I want to personally thank Nate. That's Chris Hanneman's friend, right?
Yeah. I mean, Nate made all of this possible by figuring out the authentication and the challenge portion, which allows us to connect and then send commands and deal with the encryption. So without Nate, we don't have any of this. And on the Android side,
Loud Nate. Thank you, Adrian and Steven. Loud Nate. It's Loud Nate, not Angry Nate.
There you go.
So Ben's still not back on. Well, that's fantastic. So okay. Usually, I can get kind of estimated timelines out of you. So as far as the beta goes.
Well, so it'll actually start on Tuesday. Like I said, the alpha group has access to beta 1, and probably on Tuesday there'll be a beta 2. I made a couple changes to how we filter out other Bluetooth devices. That seems to make it more reliable across the board. So that will probably actually be the first beta that the wider, the new 24 folks have access to. And if all goes well, I mean, that code, and the thing is, the code's already up in GitHub for folks that are able and want to. They can take that code and build the app themselves and get up and running now. So we're not hiding anything or holding anything back.
So it's all on GitHub.
Yep. Right now, the beta G5 stuff's on it's in a fork of Steven's xDrip experimental branch, so another branch under that called G5 Beta.
Nice.
So anything that I have currently goes up in there, and then I'll work with sort of the masters of xDrip, Adrian and Sachi, to integrate with their most recent versions. And I know there's some interest longer term to have it actually published in Google Play. So if we can figure out the logistics of that and then how to best maintain that, I think that seems like a good option.
Julie Horan asks, Wes and John, are you guys using G5 now or still prefer G4 share? Is Evan on G5 or G4?
Evan's still on G4.
Free range child with a G4 share.
Right. So it's just, we get better range. Doesn't have to walk around with the receiver or phone. So I will say it when he goes out for recess at school. He has a small pack that he wears, so we don't lose track of him, and he actually doesn't. He forgets he has it on most of the time, so it's not a huge inconvenience. And then that'll get significantly smaller if we stay with the G4. Even once Pebble's core comes out and we have something running on that, basically his uploader becomes a very small device.
And if you're keeping score at home, that is the segue for Pebble. Oh no, John froze again. John, call back in. And why? Range. Well, while we're waiting for John to call back in, Julie, I'll tell you that our son is too unstable medically to be on the G5. We need him on the G4 just because we don't move him to the newest technology in case there's problems. Our daughter was on the G5, and the range was so annoying to my wife that she said it reminded her of the 7 Plus, and so she took it off and put her back on the G4. Now, one of the interesting things about the G5 is once that transmitter is pulled out of that box, it will try to connect with the last phone it was connected with forever until it dies. So if you pull off a G5 a month early, that sucker is going to try every 5 minutes. Even if you say forget, it's going to sit there and try to bump into the Bluetooth. So that's really annoying. And Andrew, I don't know if he has Comcast. I don't have Comcast. How many do you get on G5? Assume more. How many question marks? When I've tested the G5 personally twice, a month each time. I never had a problem with the phone dropping out, but the receiver I carried on me dropped out for hours. The second time I tested it, I went over to London, and the receiver and the G5 never missed a beat. Never, ever, ever missed a beat. And the last trip to children with diabetes in DC, I had a G4 on one arm, a G5 on the other. I never noticed the difference in weight between the thin transmitter and the thicker transmitter, but when I had them both on, you could actually feel the weight of the G5, and it ended up getting knocked off, whereas the G4 lasted for a couple weeks longer. But for adults or teenagers that always have your phone with them, G5's great. Of course, there's people that have had bad experiences with it. Unfortunately, there were three people with very popular blogs. Michael Hoskins and Scott and Carrie. They all went back to the G4. That wasn't my experience, though. But if you look across the group, there is wildly differing experiences with the G5. Let's look at some questions here. Yeah, we switched Sarah back, Julie. Let's see. I can't say I ever saw any question marks on the G5. So, Lori, our daughter never had question marks that I can remember, and I know I never had question marks, but that's really not a good comparison because I have fake diabetes and not diabetes. John is back. We've been talking about how many... Have you experienced triple question marks on the G5?
Well, it's hard to say because I've only ever used xDrip, so we don't really get triple question marks, right?
All right. No, that's good. That's a good question. I didn't get it. Our daughter didn't get it.
Yeah, and Evan's only worn the G5 a few times, only with xDrip, and the few times I've worn it myself with Dexcom's app. And like you said, I mean, not having diabetes, you're less prone to any sort of...
Yeah, it's not a fair comparison. Now, Martha Rodriguez is asking, is the xDrip app for the G5 more accurate than the G5 receiver? Because we know that a lot of people have experienced improved accuracy with the xDrip Wixel than with the receiver.
Yeah, I think I've seen a strong preference for what Steven has implemented in xDrip. There's some really nice things he's doing in there. I mean, he's doing something similar to Dexcom's 505 algorithm, the least mean squares fit to the calibration data, but the ability to sort of override the data, and I'm pretty sure, and I don't know if Steven's in there, the group or not, but I think he's doing that fit over a larger population. And it may just be it'd just be better, right?
Now,
And
go ahead.
Without actually doing some sort of research study or other investigative look at and comparing Dexcom to xDrip's algorithm, it'd be probably hard pressed to say one is producing a lower MARD than the other.
Pierre.
But if people that's all that matters.
Pierre has indicated triple question marks depends on the actual data. So if you have a compression or anything similar, you may get triple question marks.
Yeah, you should. I mean, the G5 should absolutely be just as prone to triple question marks unless they've done some change in that calculation, right? So the deviation that triggers that, whatever their noise classification is. And I don't know that they've made any changes in the G5. I know they claim a lower MARD.
Hey, Katie Tannett is on. Does anybody know Katie? She's actually in the Blab group. Now for wild speculation. The G5 came out in October, end of October. We're not yet a year. I'm thinking the product life cycle, in order to recoup R&D, is going to mean there's no G6 at the end of the year. Anybody else want to wildly speculate with me on that?
I have no idea.
I hear we're going to get the thin G5 and the single applicator.
Yeah, I've seen some maybe FCC filings for the thin G5.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know what their time frame is. I'm sure they've mentioned it in their calls, but I haven't been following. I sort of just, when things come, they come.
Julie's asking which version of xDrip are you using in the alpha and beta groups, being that there's 3, 4, and 5 and bridge out. Which version did you take and make magical?
I'd have to look back at how and where I forked it. For a while, I was keeping it pretty up to date with whatever Adrian and Sachi said was the latest and greatest. So it should, once it's finally out of beta, I'll do some merging to make sure it's sort of in sync with everything, and hopefully, be in lockstep with whatever's considered the latest and greatest.
Lori wants to know, do you get noise level like you used to get in G4 with the G5?
You might be able to get that if you're running the Dexcom receiver or the iOS app. There may be what they call an opcode to get a noise classification value. I haven't seen it. I've been focused on just getting sensor value.
Right.
And in that case, that value is upstream of any classifier that Dexcom may be using.
Lori, you need to work on that. Lori's been tasked with finding that out for us. Be the pioneer, Lori. Anyways, you're talking about Pebble's new announcement. I like the price point. It's going to put pressure on the previous offerings, which is going to make them more available worldwide. So much easier to give your child a $30 watch instead of a $500 watch or a $250 watch.
Yeah, so their Pebble 2 is $99, and the Steel 2, or not the Steel 2, the Time 2's
like $169.
$169. I can't keep straight whether that goes up to $199 for post Kickstarter, and then the Core, which is their tiny Android button, will be $69 through the Kickstarter, and then I think $100 at retail, and that's probably the most interesting of the devices because they could really shrink down a rig considerably, right?
Right.
In its smallest form, you could have a G5 talk to a Core, talk to a Pebble watch, and that's your entire
man
right there. And that is also your cloud uploader.
Think about what that would do for OpenAPS. I know what it's going to do for the rigs.
Right. So OpenAPS, there's a hardware port on the bottom if they want to use that TI chip, the CC1110 to talk to the Medtronic pumps. That's probably, you could probably interface it that way. I don't know if anybody's done any interfacing with that to a Bluetooth chip, but I know there's that Riley Links device. I don't see why that couldn't interface. I think that's a Bluetooth device. I don't know a ton about it. That could interface with that core. So you could take the phones out of the equation pretty easily.
That's actually fantastic, because in DC and London, when we show the graphic of the evolution of the rig, I mean, when you get down to that small parakeet, that's literally groundbreaking. So now this would mean even smaller. But the real test will be to see if we can get it smaller than what Andrew's doing.
What's that?
The real test will be to see if we can get smaller than what Andrew is doing.
Yeah, but Andrew's little tiny device could, then just talk to the core instead of a parakeet, and then he has his uploader.
Wow, that's crazy. That's amazing. It's actually getting down to fob size.
Yeah, the real trick would be when the 3G's in the transmitter itself, right? Then you're done, right? Then you're good. But I don't know that Dexcom or any other CGM maker would care to do that anytime soon.
So the core is going to be GSM, right?
Well, 3G, I think they listed the frequency bands.
But they're not doing like CDMA or something, are they?
Yes. Yeah. So it won't work with probably every carrier, but that'll be the next exercise, finding out the best deal on a micro SIM. What is
the battery life rated? It's at 10. The battery life is rated 10 hours.
So I've seen a couple figures, and they tend to be combined with GPS and streaming usage. That seems to be the most taxing, and I think they said if you're streaming music and using the GPS, you get about 4 hours. But if you're just using GPS, you get about 20. So if we can get greater control over what power-hungry chip is being used when, then we could probably get at least 20 hours out of it, right? So if we can limit GPS use, but some folks would like that GPS use, that just becomes part of the data upload. There are more efficient protocols. I know, Ben West is a huge fan of MQTT, which is a very lightweight power pub sub.
That technology's amazing.
Yeah, and I experimented with that a while ago, and that was the only way for me to get like the really small Xperia phones to last any significant amount of time.
And Libby is saying so no CDMA for the core. No, that would be problematic. Core is 3G only. Anyone know which chip it uses? Simcom, Sierra? That's Adrian's question.
We could probably pose that question to the Reddit, the Pebble Reddit. I know Adrian was in there the other day asking about the hardware port, so he got some info on that. So I'm sure they actually, I may have a document that says, but I don't think it was super involved. Let's see if I have it handy. So we can figure it out. So even locally here, the core may not be our best bet because 3G coverage isn't as good as the CDMA and LTE stuff.
Yeah, Adrian says he wants to connect a Wixel to the core.
If the hardware interface and the APIs are good, there's no reason you couldn't do it.
Someone said something disturbing. They said, I hope Pebble's not coming out with these fantastic things because they want to get bought out.
I don't think so. I think they're having fun and enjoying what they're doing. I mean, they could get bought out, but hopefully, if they do, Eric and that group of folks stays on and continues with their vision instead of sort of rolling in with some big corporate.
Yeah, hopefully Medtronic won't buy him
out. There's a thought. Don't say such things.
Here's Stephen Black, like through Bluetooth still, connecting to the Wixel. Looks like that was a question for Adrian. It's just Android. Pierre, Medtronic's going to buy. Had a Medtronic, was in January. It's like the day will live in infamy. January 11th, 2015. Two Medtronic engineers go, we're this big cruise ship, and when we see speedboats coming up to pass us, we just reach out into the water and grab them and put them behind us in the closet. And it was like they were proud of that. It was like,
I think they let a couple get by, though, unfortunately.
Oh, well. Yeah, it's, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I don't mind Medtronic being the 600-pound gorilla. Just give us a couple 100 pounds for other people.
Right. As long as there's real competition there and we get folks pursuing quality products that can really compete. I mean, I'm sure they're not happy with their loss in CGM market share, but if it...
Yeah, the one thing that's going to be hard... The one thing that's going to be hard is there's analysts that say Medtronic, Dexcom and the other players are doing well because Medtronic hasn't gone in earnest after that market. Because they're the only ones with an international sales team, 600 deep in every country, that's in place. No offices to open. I mean, I'm glad Dexcom's in Scotland and, is going to be marketing to France and the UK, but that's a pretty giant behemoth.
Yeah.
Well, we've got 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any final questions for John regarding the Pebble, regarding the Core, or regarding the Android G5?
Yeah, and if there's something people have questions about that we don't get to tonight, they're always welcome to reach me on Facebook or.
Do you do the Twitter? Do you do the Twitter on the interwebs?
I do the Twitter. Have been known. I won't say it. That's a Stephen Colbert joke. I won't say
wow, Lori says diabetes is 1% of Medtronic. That's just scary, awful.
Yeah, they're beasts.
Let's see, Steven, is it SPI or UART or something else?
For the Core hardware interface?
Yeah, I'm guessing.
I don't think we have any of that information yet. I think they said they'd be more forthcoming about how that interface is going to work in the new.
It's much. It's.
Sure, I would.
Go ahead.
What's that?
I was just going to say it's much smaller than a tile, though, right? Julie's asking.
It's probably taller.
Right, it is thicker.
I think the tile it's probably taller. But I mean, it's a little tiny Android computer, and I was telling Laura the other night. I said, remember, back when we were first building this, I said all I want is a headless device with a cellular radio in it. That's what we need.
We'd like to thank John Costik for joining us tonight, and with his permission, we're gonna see if we can exit with him singing "Bring Him Home" from Les Mis. When we were just 2 months into Nightscout, John was already taking a break because he'd been using it for a year. So John had mentioned if he had thought of Evan while singing that would have been a pretty difficult thing to do. And y'all know me in presentations, I would have to agree. So anyways, thank you, John. Thanks everybody for showing up. And this will be available on the Nightscout page, I guess, forever. And here we go with Bring Him Home. This has been a Nightscout Foundation production. Come change the world with us. Learn more at nightscoutfoundation.org. In association with the Coexist movement, let your voice be heard while you still have a choice. And in association with CGM in the Cloud, open source, open data, open hearts, caring for you and your loved ones around the world and around the clock. We now return you to your regularly scheduled life, already in progress.